Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
We've talked a lot about accessibility selection in our Future of Work series with PEAT, but today I wanted to dive into what accessibility technology testing looks like. What is involved and what do companies look for as they are vetting and partnering with technology companies? In this interview, we're talking with an accessibility tester who will share not only his technical insights, but his expertise on what we should be looking for, the process, as well as advice for HR technology companies as they develop accessible tech for workplaces to purchase and deploy. This episode of the Workology Podcast is part of our Future of Work series powered by PEAT, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. In honor of the upcoming 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act this July, we're investigating what the next 30 years will look like for people with disabilities at work and the potential of emerging technologies to make workplaces more inclusive and accessible. Today, I'm joined by Hadi Ragan. Hadi is an information technology accessibility specialist for Accessible Technology Services, which includes the Accessible Technology Center and DoIT. His main focus is working with DoIT to promote accessible technology design for students across the nation and working with staff, developers, administration, and technology vendors that support the University of Washington. Hadi has worked with companies including Zoom, Microsoft, Workday, and PeopleSoft. Hadi, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a member of IT accessibility team at the University of Washington, and my primary responsibility is to make sure the software that we design and develop in our campus are used by everyone, including people with disability. At the UW, at the Access Technology Services, we provide a large variety of accessibility-related services. Our department consists of two sub-units, Access Technology Center, as well as, and then the other unit is DoIT. Access Technology Service provides accessibility services to the entire campus, and DoIT provides a lot of programs, including access computing project. Some of our DoIT projects are funded by federal grant, including National Science Foundation, that is supporting access engineering to broaden the participation of people with disability in access computing fields. Access computing is all about partnership, and then for our projects, we usually partner with higher education as well as industry.
How did you end up working in technology accessibility testing? Why is it an important industry and field for you to be working in?
Let me tell you how I got to this place. I am originally from Iran and then studied computer science from 1986 to 1994 in Germany at the University of Karlsruhe. In 1994, I came to the United States as part of an exchange program between Oregon State University and the University of Karlsruhe to stay for 6 months to work with Dr. Gardner, who is still a pioneer in accessibility on one of his accessibility projects that he was running at that time. So my 6 months ended to 2 years, and then I graduated there and I had the job. And I didn't see any need really to go back to Germany. So after graduating from Oregon State University, I worked for another 2 years for Dr. Gardner. And then I went to New Mexico State University to work on similar accessibility project. Then I decided to work for a private sector. I worked for a telecommunication company for a few years. But accessibility has been always my side concern, and then a job. I always did some side jobs as an accessibility consultant. Uh, then I think in 2004 I decided to work full time for accessibility. So I was introduced to Dr. Gunderson at the University of Illinois, and then I had the opportunity to work with him for over 10 years. That was actually where I considered to become an accessibility expert. At that job, I had the opportunity to work with many vendors and many software companies, and which has become my passion and my expertise. And in 2014, I moved to University of Washington, and I'm working for Access Technology Services, led by Dr. Cheryl Burgstall.
Talk to me about the process for testing technologies for accessibility. What goes into the process on your side?
It depends on when we get involved into accessibility projects. We are very fortunate that at the University of Washington, we don't have to go after products. I mean, the people who are purchasing the product or departments who are purchasing the products, they are aware about accessibility, and they come to us, and then we work with them on making sure the software that they're designing or developing or purchasing are accessible. So it is not always the case. Sometimes we are informed about the deployment of an application right in the last minute, so where we have really no chance to do anything about it. But preferably, we would like to be involved from the beginning. The types of software that we are dealing with are locally developed software or purchased through the third-party vendors. If it is about developing a software in our campus, so we sit down with them and then we get involved in their design process, and then making sure that they are not introducing non-accessible experience or technology in their design and implementation. But when we are working with the third-party application vendors, when we get involved is very important. For example, sometimes we are involved at the RFP process. At that stage is the best time because we can ensure that the software is tested and evaluated and issues are identified. And then so we can come up with a roadmap to address those issues. Sometimes campus wants to purchase a product and we have no choice, but having a roadmap with the vendor that they know the accessibility problem with their product, and then so we can come up with a timeline plan when and how those issues should be addressed. This is really a key. Otherwise, every software will tell you, oh yes, we care for accessibility, and then we are dedicated for that, but they don't dedicate resources to achieve their goals. So as a result, it never comes to the top of the priority list for them, and accessibility remains an ongoing issue, it continues to be a problem.
What are some things that HR leaders can do to understand accessibility better? This has been a challenge for so many of us in HR when we're demoing software. And oftentimes we're told prior to and signing the contract that the technology is accessible, but then later on we find out once we are implementing it in our organization that it isn't always the case.
Unfortunately, it is correct. Indeed, we fall frequently, or many of us who are in the purchasing, who make the purchasing decision, they fall into that trap that the companies, they come and then they demonstrate or they talk to them about accessibility, how dedicated they are. And they talk about their VPAT, Volunteer Product Accessibility Template, which is self-explaining statement about accessibility of the product, and they tell us tell the purchasers whatever they want to hear, and they but unfortunately, the purchasing department, they don't have any mechanism or they have any resources to verify their claims. And then as a result, they purchase it and then they later discover the accessibility problem. My suggestion or the way that we handle at the University of Washington is that we get involved in purchasing products. As I mentioned earlier, preferably we would like to be involved from the beginning so we can evaluate and the application for accessibility and provide a report to those people who are making the decision. So they know from the beginning, here, this application has these issues. But the good thing is that having an issue is not the end of the world. We can come up with a roadmap. We can come up with a plan that the company can address those issues. And then usually we get involved and then work as a consultant or enter the collaboration with the company. And then those people who are running the product or the service on campus and help them to address those issues. So if you don't have accessibility experts on campus, you might want to build one because I believe accessibility is as important as security and privacy. So if you don't have accessibility expert, you might want to build it, or you might want hire accessibility consultant to evaluate that, so you know that what you getting, and you don't fall into that trap.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology Podcast. Today we are talking with Hadi Rangan about accessibility testing for workplace technology. This podcast is sponsored by Workology and is part of our Future of Work series in partnership with the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT.
The Workology Podcast Future of Work series is supported by PEAT, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. PEAT's initiative is to foster collaboration and action around accessible technology in the workplace. PEAT is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, ODEP. Learn more about PEAT at peatworks.org. That's peatworks.org.
I know you've worked with a host of very recognizable technology companies. We talked about them at the beginning of the show, a few: Zoom, Microsoft, Workday, and PeopleSoft. When it comes to accessibility, do they come to you or do you approach them, or are they coming to the university specifically?
For obvious reason, we can only work with those companies who have some business relationship with the University of Washington, or we are using their software. I wish that they were coming to us instead of us going to them. We usually get involved in working with this company through our service owner and service manager. For most services that we use at University of Washington, we have a service owner and a service manager. Service owner is in charge of purchasing the product, making sure that all those fees are paid, and then security or patches are applied, and then it's connected. The software works with other software in our campus, and service manager is responsible for day-to-day application operation. We never work directly with the company. Our collaboration is always through our service owner and service managers. In our collaboration with the company, we try to educate them about the accessible design, though we start with fixing the low-hanging fruit and then issues that can be easily resolved. But our long-term goal with the company is that to train them in accessibility design and implementation, best practices, and then build accessibility liaison. So sometimes we end up training their staff. We have provided training, specialized training to many companies in the past years. And then as a result, we see that those companies are producing more accessible and usable products. You ask about the certification. I am not personally in favor of certification programs. We have seen in the past that sometimes companies, they use this certification as a blank check, as if the mission is accomplished. Accessibility is an ongoing process. So that's the same way that you cannot say that, hey, we are safe and secure, so we don't need to worry about security. Something can always happen, and then security can be jeopardized. Accessibility can be reversed or damaged or destroyed sometime by new updates, adding new features, changing the user interfaces. So we do not generally support providing certificate. We can always say that these companies are working with us. Some of them are putting a lot of effort, investing a lot of resources. We can always say that that they are committed as of now, but we cannot give them a blank check with a certificate because we really do not know what will happen in 6 months or in a year. Hope it makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that. It's a moving target, and a lot of times they'll use certification in their marketing and sales efforts, and it's not always accurate because, as you're saying, things change. So what is good today meets standards for accessibility in your guys' mind might not be that way in even as little as 2 weeks, depending upon updates.
Exactly.
What advice do you have for maybe HR technology companies that want to make their technology more accessible for the workplace, for their users? I ask because I've heard from several companies that they've told me privately that the cost of accessibility software development is a big issue and them being able to move forward.
First, if accessibility is taught at the beginning, it is free. We do not have anything like, accessibility can be made or can make a software development more expensive. I mean, companies are spending a lot of time for security and privacy, and accessibility is as important as that. So accessibility is not something that they have to do that extra. They just need to follow the design and implementation best practices. If they do that, there is $0 cost for accessibility. And if a company comes and asks about extra money for accessibility feature or fixing some bugs, that is something that we should never ever even listen or even contemplate that. So that is an absolute no. Nobody should come to the idea to pay the company for accessibility features. Most of accessibility issues that we see that indeed are usability issues, but people with disability are more impacted by them. By addressing those issues that we call that accessibility issues, they make the product more accessible to everyone. So it is not something that we can say that only people with disability can benefit from that. No, everybody can benefit from that. For example, we talk about the customization. If I am not dealing with a specific component in my application, so if the application allows me to customize it and then hide that, and so it is not in my way anymore, so everybody would benefit from that. Accessibility we should not pay for accessibility feature. It should be part of the feature set for every application, and then every application developer the best practices, then it is free, and then the product is accessible out of box. Secondly, consider that if a lawsuit comes, I'm pretty sure it will be much more expensive.
I have heard this. It's like, it's going to cost us $60,000 or $120,000 to make it accessible. That's too expensive for us to be able to do. And that's come from several different organizations after I have had several presentations where we talk about technology accessibility and workplace accessibility. It's a good point that you're making about the lawsuit on the other side of things.
Right, but I stay on my statement that never even they should even think to pay for that. I mean, if something is not accessible, it means that application is not good, really not good. One of the good things that it helps me to discuss with the designer and the developers is my background, which is in computer science and human-centered design, engineering. So I can discuss with them, and I can, show them and demonstrate a lot of things that they are doing is not correct based on the stuff that we have learned, in school. So again, accessibility must be part of the application feature set, and we should never pay for that. And again, if the software developer, they follow the design and implementation best practices, they get for free.
Talk to me about one of your biggest technology accessibility pet peeves.
I don't know your audience are familiar with VPAT. VPAT stands for Volunteer Product Accessibility Template. This is a statement that companies they make about their applications, how accessible it is. While we are seeing more accurate VPATs in the past years, but most of the VPATs that we see, as my colleague Dan says, that they are entertaining. So when we read that as an expert, and we really can laugh about it. They are claiming things that, it's not applicable, something like that, how is the weather? And they said that I like Apple. It can be so unrelated. The responses that they give or the statement that they make in their VPATs. And that is one of my real concern, that they come with this shiny VPAT and they introduce that to purchaser, the department or procurement department, and they see all those statements that you would like to hear or see. For example, we are compliant with VCAC 2.0, 2.1, or whatever guidelines, and then they have no means to verify that. So that is my biggest concern. And as I mentioned earlier, I think every of us are responsible for verifying these claims. If we don't have accessibility people on board, we might want to build it, or we might want to use external consulting to verify that. Otherwise, we end up with a product that are not accessible, and we have to pay a lot of money for accommodation for the lack of the accessibility, due to lack of the accessibility of the service that we are purchasing.
This is an important point that you're making, that if we purchase technology to use in our workplaces that isn't accessible for all our employees, then the employer will need to oftentimes pay for the accommodation. And that might mean bringing in an extra person to even help with things like screen reading for that individual. If the tech that they're using, if you have a payroll processor in HR and they can't use the payroll processing technology because it isn't screen reader compatible, an accommodation is to bring in an individual to read the screen for your payroll processor.
Correct. Consider all the money that you will be paying for accommodation. At the end, it might be much more than if you spend the money to verify the accessibility features. I need to emphasize that if you are really purchasing a specific product, I mean, it doesn't have to be 100% accessible. We don't have, unfortunately, the luxury to go to a store and then choose between product A and B. Sometimes this is only one player in the market, and we have to buy that product. But testing and verifying or identifying the accessibility issues before purchasing gives us the leverage to negotiate with the vendor and in the contract. So to tell them, hey, we found these issues. Some of them we call that showstopper. It means they are so severe that many user or most user cannot proceed. Once we have the list of the accessibility issues, we can come up with a plan and tell them, hey, we would love to see that these accessibility features, for example, these showstopper or priority one issues, are addressed in 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or whatever they negotiate. But there should be a plan. Sometimes these statements, that we care for accessibility, or we make sure these are not sufficient. We have too many of these cases in the past. The company told us, oh, we care, and some of them even said that, oh, we have people with disability in our family, we understand that. But at the end of the road, money talks. Do not pay them. To make them, conditional the payment until they fixes or the promises in the contract.
I love when you say accessibility is as important as security when it comes to technology. I think it's important to repeat what you've said.
Indeed, we cannot deploy products that have severe accessibility issues, or we call that showstopper or deployment blocker issues. Similar way when a product has security holes. By deploying a product that about accessibility issues, you open yourself to a lot of expensive lawsuit. And then, besides that, think about the end user. I mean, you are providing that service that all your employee, all your staff, or everybody in your community uses the software. By introducing an inaccessible software, you discriminate them, and you do not give them the proper means to do their job. So which will impact the overall performance of the entire system. But unfortunately, some of us, they see only the performance within my unit. We do not see the big picture, that other people are involved and they cannot do the job. One thing that I personally experienced, and then which makes me very passionate for accessibility, is that I have experienced accessibility as a student, as a faculty, as a staff, or now with multiple hats. So I understand that. On the side of my job, I talk with people with disability that they cannot do their job, or I see students that they are falling behind because the technology that is used on campus by the faculty is not accessible, so they fall behind. And then so this is not something that we can afford forever. We have been paying a big price for lack of accessibility by leaving so many people behind. By making sure the accessibility is intact, or the software that you are providing to your campus or to your organization is accessible, you give a fair choice to everyone to perform equally, and then or fairly. I would say that accommodation is no longer the best solution for accessibility problem.
Are there any technology companies who you think are leading the way in accessibility? I'm also curious if there are companies that you have found in your experience maybe that might be more open to hearing feedback from customers than others.
Let me make a disclosure that any company that I name here, it does not mean that we endorse their product. Just talking about their accessibility effort. And their accessibility effort does not mean they have already an fully accessible product. Yes, there are a lot of companies that we are working, and they are eager for every bit of information, accessibility consulting that we can provide to them. We have been working with, you mentioned some of the companies like Microsoft, various team with Microsoft Windows team, Microsoft Office team, various product, Microsoft Mac Outlook team, Zoom, Google Forms, Google Cloud projects or platform. We recently started working with Google Docs. You mentioned Zoom. Workday has been another product that we have been working for over 5 years with them. And another smaller company like Poll Everywhere, Manifold, and Pressbooks, and really many more. Depending on the size of the company and then the development infrastructure that they have, our collaborations can be quite different. Sometimes with a small company, we sit down with the designer, developer, right at the table, and then we discuss the issue, and we propose some solutions, and then they learn it and they go and implement it. With other products, like Google products or Microsoft, where they have a very distributed development system, some of them are sitting here, some of them, in China, in India, or different parts of the world. It is different. Some of them, they give us access to their bug tracking system, so we can easily see that how if they are working out the issues that we have reported. In some other with some other companies, we don't get access to their bug tracking system. So all these companies have some means to address accessibility, but really the outcome is not the same. Of course, some product like Google Docs or Microsoft Word is significantly bigger program than, for example, a company like Pool Everywhere that offers a small product. The fact is that all these companies, they have some accessibility programs. Companies like Workday, they have a well-established accessibility team. There are companies like, a smaller company, like, as I said, Manifold. So we are dealing with only a couple of people. And then I do not know that when these people or are no longer with that company, what will happen with the company, with the accessibility of that product. So what I'm trying to say that, again, depending on the size of the company, the products, and then, distributed development system they have, sometimes accessibility stays there forever. Sometimes, it can change from one version to another because it depends on the people, not, they don't have accessibility systematically in their design and development process.
We have been asking this question throughout this year's PEAT Future of Work podcast series. And I wanted to ask you, as we look to the next 30 years of work, what emerging trends or technologies do you think will have the biggest impact on people with disabilities?
I think the technology that we are using for remote work or kind of hybrid work, that would be the theme or the one of the biggest area that we have a lot of room for improvement. As a person with disability, I know that some of us cannot, secure a position because of the transportation or commute. I think this pandemic situation due to coronavirus has given us or forced us to try the remote work or a kind of hybrid work and see that how it works. I'm hearing, I cannot verify the data, but I'm hearing from some companies that they say that the performance of some of their employee has been increased since when they are working remotely. I'm not sure it can be applied to every job. Not if you are a cook, you cannot work remotely, but there are many type of jobs that can be performed remotely or in kind of hybrid format. Offices, will be different. Home probably will have in future a more dedicated home office. There will be some concern, about the accommodation of people with disability at work. If I am a person with disability and I need some equipments, who is going to pay for that? Or who can support me with that? Or who is responsible for the insurance? If something happened while I am working from my home office, who is does the work insurance cover that or not? I'm pretty sure, that if we go that route, then the laws and regulations will change. But I think, as I said, technology for that allowing user to work remotely become more mature, more flexible, and I think this will be something that we should look forward to it.
Hadi, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people go to learn more about you and what you do?
Thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you and then share my opinion of the accessibility solutions that we have for as far as IT accessibility goes. To learn more about our work, you can go to uw.edu/accessibility, or you can search for us, University of Washington, Access Technology. You will get a lot of links to our resources, and I will be providing some links to you so you can share with your audience.
Fantastic. We'll be sure to include those in the resources section of the podcast transcript. So if you just go to Workology, you can access those links there and be able to connect with Hadi and the team at University of Washington directly.
Are you tired of putting your professional development on the back burner? It's time for you to invest in yourself with Upskill HR by Workology. We're a membership community focused on personal development for HR. Gain access to our elite community, training, coaching, and events. Learn more at upskillhr.com.
Hadi shared in his interview that accessibility is important, is just as important as security when it comes to technology. Companies are hiring or employing entire teams who are focused on testing and working with technology partners to ensure that the tech we as employers purchase is accessible to all our employees. My hope is that the technology companies who are listening to this podcast will learn from this interview. We need to be accessibility focused from the inception of the development of our technology products, not after the fact. This Future of Work series is in partnership with PEAT, and it is one of my favorites. Thank you to PEAT, as well as our podcast sponsor, Workology. Podcast sponsor, Workology. Podcast sponsor, Workology. Podcast sponsor, Workology. Podcast sponsor.